Hey there, and welcome to That Bond Show, That Nerdy Site's newest show and the internet's #1 James Bond rewatch show, hosted by two guys named Logan and Trevor. Probably. Join us as we dive through a new Bond movie from Dr. No to No Time to Die. I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me, as always, is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
For a few days there, you were a Phoenix Sun too.
That's true. For a few days there, I was a Phoenix Sun. In fact, me and Trevor actually watched this movie together in Phoenix a couple nights ago here. So this was a special episode of That Bond Show in some ways. Yes, we are this week covering Diamonds Are Forever, the 7th Bond film. We're officially in the 1970s. This was released December 17th of 1971. Trevor, as always, you have no knowledge of this movie, I would assume. We're officially kind of in the dark ages here now for you.
Yeah, very much so. Obviously, like my biggest understanding of this movie has come from internet and you being like, yeah, there was Connery's like first 5, and then he left, and then he came back for one, and it was different. And yeah, it was different. It might be another one of those cases where like expectations had been set so low that this somehow surpassed them, or just watching it with you actually here, and we were just kind of like riffing on it and making fun of the movie as it went along, made for an overall like better experience than I think you were anticipating I was going to have with it.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is going to be a tricky one, right? So I guess you can put like an asterisk on it if you want, because me and Trevor did watch this one together, and we did just riff on it a lot and have a lot of fun in a very kind of mystery science theater 3000 vibe to it. And so that made it a more fun experience than it might have been watching it by itself. But I will say, Diamonds Are Forever is a weird movie. It is a very strange, it's a very weird movie. And I think your enjoyment out of it is going to come largely down to, do you like camp or not? And if you do, boy howdy, do I have the movie for you. Because they pretty much lean full board into it in a lot of ways. But we'll get into that in a little bit here. Before that, we've got the cast and crew here. Starring as James Bond, we've got Sean Connery in his 6th and final outing as 007 in the official series. We've got Jill St. John as Tiffany Case. We've got Charles Gray as Ernst Stavro Blofeld. We've got Jimmy Dean from Jimmy Dean Sausage as Willard White. In one of the weirder fun facts for you there, as a little tease of a trivia thing. That is from Jimmy Dean Sausage. That is who Willard White is.
There you go.
We have got Bruce Cabot as Bert Saxby. We've got Bruce Glover as Mr. Wint. Trevor, we had talked a lot about this. That is Crispin Glover's dad. It actually is his real life dad. In the craziest, like I was like, because for years I've been like, this dude's super weird and unnerving, a lot like Crispin Glover. But I was never like dug into it at all. And then doing the casting crew this time, that is his dad. And it immediately makes so much sense because they look alike and they very much have similar acting methods. Even listening to him kind of talk on the making of documentary that I watched before doing this pod, that is Crispin Glover's dad, all right. I will say just how he speaks. So
that tracks perfectly.
That is in the run for being my favorite fun fact of this movie. It was incredible. I love it. Putter Smith is Mr. Kidd. Norman Burton is Felix Leiter. Joe Robinson is Peter Franks. And then we've got Desmond Llewellyn returning as Q, Lois Maxwell as Moneypenny, and Bernard Lee as M. This film was directed by Guy Hamilton. It is his 2nd film in the series, and the first one since Goldfinger. And spoiler alert, I hope you like Guy Hamilton, because that's the next 3 movies. They invested big. In the Blast from the Past section, Richard Nixon is the president. Ed Heath is the prime minister of the UK. Fiddler on the Roof was actually the highest grossing movie in the US this year. Diamonds Are Forever was 5th for what it's worth. Although, to be fair to Diamonds, it had the, at the time, highest 7-day gross ever in the UK and the highest 3-day gross ever in the US when it was released. So it was still a big box office success. Keeping with the space themes of the first few Blast from the Past sections, Apollo 14 and 15 each landed on the moon, and Paul McCartney for our Beatles section released Ram this year. Then the Boston Celtics, in case you were curious at home audience, did not win the NBA title this year. Yes, and then we are diving right on into the trivia section. Obviously, after George Lazenby departed the series after his sole film in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, producers initially thought about replacing him with a number of actors. The reports pretty much named half of Hollywood, it felt like, ranging from John Gavin, Clint Eastwood, Adam West, Burt Reynolds, Robert Wagner, that's a special one for you, Trevor, Brett Halsey, and Malcolm Roberts were all some of the names mentioned in various reports and the making of documentaries. Michael Gambon was apparently offered the role, but turned it down for being, quote, in terrible shape, end quote. Broccoli and Saltzman each wanted to cast Roger Moore, yet again, his name being bandied about, but he was in the midst of shooting the Crusaders, and was unable to take part in the filming for this film, unfortunately for them. Diving a bit more into this, John Gavin was actually offered the role, and there was a contract signed between him and Ion Productions, and eventually United Artists president David Picker, as we kind of transition into the second thing, pretty much said Sean Connery's got to be back in the role, and so they eventually kind of pushed Gavin away from the contract, but Cubby Broccoli, liked Gavin, had no beef with him, and so he ended up demanding that Gavin's full contract be paid out to him, even though he never actually took part in the role. Speaking of David Picker and United Artists President David Picker, again, wanted Connery very much in the role. The actor was eventually enticed back to being James Bond yet again, with a then record $1.25 million salary, and he was also offered back-to-back films of his choice to come back to the role. Those two films would end up being The Offense, directed by Connery's friend Sidney Lemieux, and a Scottish-only cast of Macbeth that tragically never came to be because of Roman Polanski's Macbeth coming out the same year. Connery would use that record-setting salary of $1.25 million to found the Scottish International Education Trust, which allows Scottish artists to apply for funding without having to leave their home country. There is a whole thing from a very old, 1970s Sean Connery interview about Diamonds Are Forever, where he goes into that being a major reason why he wanted to come back, to help give that the funds to survive and have no excuse not to kind of stick around. The actor playing Mr. Wint, Bruce Glover, as I mentioned, is the father of Crispin Glover. I just love that fun fact enough, so I had to say it a second time. This is the last film in the series in which Bond is going to wear a hat during the opening gun barrel sequence. And this is also the first Bond movie not to use the villain from the novel itself. Blofeld is this film's villain, whereas in the book it is the Sprang brothers, who are American gangsters. Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, for what it's worth, are from the novel itself. Diamonds Are Forever would mark the final appearance of Blofeld for 44 years, until 2015 Spectre rebooted the character. As we talked about before, this is kind of the end of the first 7 film kind of timeline we've been going, where they're all kind of sequels to each other and all kind of flow more or less together. After this film, with kind of the departure of Connery and the arrival of Roger Moore in the next film, they basically make them a whole new thing where you don't really need to watch any of the movies in any particular order. And the final trivia fact is a particular favorite. Mashed potatoes were used to replicate the consistency of the brown substance mud bath in the film's opening, which was a great idea, except for the fact that under the lighting and just being left outside in the mud bath pit for 24 hours, By the time they actually started to film the scenes, the smell was almost unbearable. And there's a really funny moment in the making of documentary where they pull the lever to like douse the actor or stuntman in mashed potatoes, and then basically call cut immediately and like pull him out because he's just covered in it and it's just the stench is unbearable and he can't handle it. So yes, that is all mashed potatoes. And now we've got the 70-second recap. I did this one in about 64 seconds when I tried it earlier today, so I'm feeling pretty confident in it. But let's see what we got here. Trevor, are you ready with the timer?
I am indeed.
Let's do it. Bond searches for Blofeld in the wake of Tracy's death, finally finding him and an aspiring lookalike in a mud bath. Bond takes on the lookalike and kills Blofeld. Afterwards, Bond learns about diamond smuggling, baddies Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd take care of some loose ends, and Tiffany Case is introduced. Bond takes Peter Frank's identity, then kills Franks in a great fight, and tricks Case into thinking Franks is Bond and Bond is Franks. Bond and Case go to Vegas, see a funeral home, check out Shady Tree, and finally meet Willard White, who's actually Blofeld posing as White. Felix Leiter shows up to do nothing. Typical. Case gets taken down by Blofeld. Bond meets Thumper and Bambi and rescues White, and then drops from the sky in a ball and gets picked up by Blofeld. After some mishaps with a cassette tape, Bond throws Blofeld's mini-sub into the control center, stops the Diamond satellite, and then goes on a cruise with Case where he kills Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd in particularly gruesome fashion.
How long do you think it was?
I don't think it was 70 seconds. I'll say like 64, which is what I kind of pegged it at earlier.
You picked up the pace a little bit. 58 seconds.
Hey, okay, there we go. See, I had to make a comeback after the last few weeks. Trevor, how many people were killed?
Let's see here. Once again, going to alloutabubblegum.com. I have let's see. Did I do it? I did not do like a named breakdown of the kills on this one. So how about I give you the overall kill count for the film, and you guess how many of those are attributed to James Bond, or I can give you the option to how many are attributed to Wint and Kidd, Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd.
Oh, a lot of fun things. So in terms of named characters who are killed, I guess the qualifier for that too that I'll add on is
I'm not gonna have those. I don't have those, especially because like a lot of them are like just Blofeld body double or something.
This
like
is what
that.
I was gonna say. Like, would we count those as named characters since they're just a Blofeld body double?
I would. I don't. What I'm saying is I don't have the named
numbers?
characters numbers. I just have overall like this is how many people they say were killed by Bond /007, and then this is how many were killed by Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd.
Bond killed,
and I will say the overall total of the film is a tally of 77 bodies. Good
Lord.
A lot of that is oil rig assault bodies.
Sure.
So just like kind of the last one where it was like a lot of bodies on the ski resort. This is like a lot of miscellaneous people. Whether or not Bond is heavily involved in those is little wishy-washy.
Bond killed the guy in the bathtub. The Spyron looked like he killed him. He killed the Blofeld body double. He killed one of the guards in the opening pre-credit sequence. There's 3 right there that he took out.
Yep.
After that, he doesn't kill anyone until Peter Franks, I believe. And then he goes to the funeral home. He doesn't kill anyone there. He goes to Vegas. Mr. Kill Shady Tree. So he doesn't do that one. He kills another Blofeld body double. I don't think he kills anyone in the moon buggy escape. I think they're just kind of like runaway guards and flip over. And the car chase doesn't kill anyone again, I think. So now we're really booking it to more the ending part of the movie. I think, that's where it kind of becomes tricky because like how the people that he kills in like the oil rig attack. He kills Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd for sure. So there's 7. And then I'll throw in 3 people on the oil rig attack he might kill, right? So I'm going to say Bond kills 10. As for Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, for that one that you also have, They kill the school teacher. They kill the dentist. They kill Shady Tree. And then, I don't know if they kill anyone else after that. I'm going to say Mr. and Mr. Kid kill 4 and Bond kills 10 is my final answer.
So Bond is credited with 28 kills,
Jesus,
but I will say
yeah.
20 of those are oil rig assaults, where it's basically
pretty close in, yeah.
Or 21 of them are oil rig, where it's counting Professor Metz, 5 of Blofeld's men, and 15 scientists on the explosion.
What I'll say for that then, if he's credited with 28.
So the
21 are on the oil rig.
Yeah,
I was banging the money with 7 then before I added an oil rig desk. Okay, I'll take that as a victory then.
Yep. You nailed all those. As for Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, you missed the 2 that they blow up in the helicopter alongside the after they kill the dentist, as well as they kill Penny O'Toole.
I guess. Yeah, that's a great
point. They're credited as the killers for Penny O'Toole. So they had a combined total of 6, and basically they're all shared because they do everything together.
Yeah, they're probably in the running for being the most lethal henchman potentially in any Bond movie that we're going to see going forward or in the past. Like, I mean, really, aside from Bond, they kill everyone that they come in contact with. They're a very lethal dynamic duo there. Okay, I'm counting that as a victory, though. I got the Bond one right.
Yeah.
Trevor, what'd you think of the movie?
This one was, I mean, like as we kind of alluded to, it was bad, but it was bad in a fun way to just basically I said as soon as we were done, I was like, I was at least entertained with this one versus Thunderball, which just left me bored so much because of how that was shot and what they were going for. So this, like you always talk about, you'd rather if a movie's going to be bad, at least make it interesting. Mm-hmm. This one was at least interesting and fun and like easy to kind of like pick and poke holes into and just kind of like have that fun. Made more so by having you right here next to me, so we could kind of just joke about it throughout. And I very much said like, this episode could very easily have gone a completely different direction if we hadn't watched them together. And I watched it and was just like, oh my God, this is so terrible. Mm-hmm. Is this what I have to look forward to for the next 2 months? And but yeah, ultimately it like I had more fun with this, and I would be more inclined to go back and watch this one than at least Thunderball and possibly others. I think like Sean Connery feels like he's phoning it in again, unsurprisingly so maybe. But I really did enjoy Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd. While I was confused by the like casting of the actor who played Henderson a couple movies ago as the new version of Blofeld, and why they continue to just cast new Blofelds every time, I didn't hate his performance. I thought he had some fun, and him and Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, as I kind of alluded to, are like they're the ones who most know what movie they're making here. And maybe Bambi and Thumper, whereas like other people are taking it too seriously, or the script was not written to favor, the other performance styles and whatnot. So like the camp nature of Mr. Wint, Mr. Kidd, and this version of Blofeld, like I enjoyed, I had fun with. Blofeld getting to have basically scenes with himself is that's always gonna be a fun thing for to see an actor do if they do it well, and I thought he did it well. I thought he had some fun with it. So yeah, especially for 1970s, James Bond only ever being really in the scene with one of those people at a time kind of thing. Like I thought they did a pretty good job of making that a seamless thing. I loved the extra detail of there being a doppelganger for Blofeld's cat as well. I appreciated that attention to detail. I like when Q pops up out there in Vegas.
Yeah.
I liked the Vegas setting in general, kind of the old
Mm.
school Vegas setting.
Yeah.
Was a fun vibe. As we kind of touched on, like the complete nonchalance of what were apparently nuclear bombs being blown up around the
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
is wild.
Yeah.
Especially the fact that like basically one of them just happens in the middle of a conversation between Bond and Willard White. Like they're having a conversation. We cut away to like Chinese bombs being exploded, and then we cut back
Yeah.
to them, and they're just acting as if nothing's happened. Very very fascinating choices made there,
Mhm.
as well as like that like clearly there was I think we touched on this in some of the trivia you and I were discussing, like clearly with all the money going to pay Sean Connery, the budget for special effects got cut, and it shows in a lot of those kinds of sequences.
Mm.
um uh but yeah, like overall I had a fun enough time with this,
Mhm.
that I was pleasantly surprised with how, like, I would never say this is a good movie, but it was, it was a fun bad movie.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think you have rubbed off on me a little bit with this movie, right? Like I was watching clips of it today as well, just kind of go through it and be like, really, like, where's my mind at on this movie? And yeah, like maybe this is the first bad fun movie in the series. I don't know. Like I've typically have just called it a bad movie. Especially as someone who does love Connery's Bond movies so much. Like this is such a different take on those films, and it's a different, you know, version of that character. But there is something to be said for it being, yeah, like it's not good. I can't emphasize that enough. But there's a lot of fun had here, and
There's a
like it's
wild
very
moon buggy
strange.
sequence. There's a
There's
car
a
chase
weird movie
where
sequence.
they go down an alley like
Yep.
tilted one way, and they come out of the alley tilted the other way. And I will say I hopped into IMDb into like the goofs or kind of section that they have,
Yeah.
and somebody basically like went out and called it out as like, this is incorrectly regarded as a goof, because you see during that sequence Bond tilts like turns the steering wheel to like
Yeah.
adjust the car as if it's going over another ramp. I'm like, that's still not a that no that's still bad, that's still a goof, because we don't see the other ramp, we don't see how the car actually changes that. Like they just included a shot of him turning the wheel to explain why it goes in pointing one way and comes out pointing the other.
So I'll have you know, like it'll make you happy because I've that scene has always bothered me. That there is like a 6 minute like part of the making of documentary that is focused on just that one scene, and how there's a whole bunch going on with there, right? Where like the shot where they're like filmed going into it is filmed on a soundstage in London, and then the shot of them coming out of it is obviously filmed on location in Vegas. So it's different things happening there. And originally, like they had an American stunt team do the like exit shot basically, and it was the correct side. But the problem was that in the American one that they done, there were like cop cars in the background that you could see for like blocking people off. People like hovering on like the fences, and so the shot didn't work. Right? They did two different takes, and both didn't work because of the people around them. And so they had to like wait a month, and then they like redid it with like a French stunt team because the Americans couldn't like replicate coming out on two wheels. And when the French team did it, they incorrectly did it the wrong way, right? That popped out on the incorrect kind of side of the car. And they had the like continuity editor on the making of documentary, and she was like, I cringe to this day looking at this. And it's like it's just wrong immediately. And they cut to Guy Hamilton, and like she's like lambasting from like they just did it. Like they didn't fix it at all. And then they cut to Guy Hamilton being like, oh no, like we fixed it. And he's like, I made sure to go back to the Pinewood Studios, grab Jill St. John and Sean Connery, put them in the car, and show him like turning the wheel the other way. And it's like, that's the best we could do, kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, but that's not fixing it. That's what you put in a shot to make it make somewhat more sense. And yeah, it was just great to like back forth in like Guy Hamilton being like, I sort of fixed it. And the continuity editor being like, no, you didn't. It's awful. And I loved every part of that in the making of documentary.
Yeah. I will also like, just because I'm thinking back into your recap there, like you really love the fight between Bond
I
and
do.
Franks way more than I do, and that I mean that tracks based on how much you love the fight between Red Grant and Bond.
Mm. Mhm.
Like you love that like close quarters brawl, whereas
Yeah.
this just it as somebody like who studied stage combat and stuff, this just didn't feel cinematically engaging.
Mm.
It felt like two guys just kind of like rumbling around in a 3 by 3 foot space or whatever, like whatever that
Yeah.
elevator was. And it like it could have been like, I mean, like it's the kind of thing nowadays that you would see, you know, you would be certainly cut to hell, but like you would see kind of like each combatant kind of getting the upper hand. You'd see like close cuts, and you would see the action, and if it was done in a, you know, in a good production, you'd see, you know, like a continuous shot of just very well choreographed kind of
Mm.
hand-to-hand combat kind of stuff, whereas this just felt like a couple of guys grappling with one another around a thing.
Mhm.
And it just felt more messy than I feel like super spy James Bond should feel. And so yeah, I like I started to crack a joke out of that, and you were like, this is one of the best parts of the movie, so you know, live it up. And I was like, oh, that's not great. um and you know, sure, again, I by the end of the movie, like I thought back on that, I was like, yeah, no, I think Logan just likes brawler Connery much more than I do.
Definitely, right? I mean, I think we've talked about this before, how, you know, every Bond has their own distinct style and flair to them and kind of what makes them James Bond. And I think a large part of Connery's is the fact that he does have kind of this brawler fighting style, right? In some ways, Daniel Craig's fighting style, I think, is most similar to Connery's in a lot of ways. It's kind of this brawler, not as like refined necessarily fighting style. I think of like Casino Royale in particular. Um, and I love it, right? I love those kind of fighting styles. That it does feel more natural, I think, right? Like it doesn't feel like it is necessarily a beautifully put together choreographed fight. It feels like two dudes just trying to stay alive. And I think it is like done expertly in the case of From Russia with Love with Red Grant and Bond. Here, I don't like this fight as much, but I still think it's a great fight that showcases a brawler Connery. And it's one of the few moments in the film, I think, that is doing something serious and also doing it well, right? Whereas I feel like Diamonds Are Forever is interesting because you kind of touched on it throughout the film. There's this weird dichotomy of like people understand what kind of film they're in and going full camp and just like chewing up scenes because of it, right? Like I think Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd are fantastic in the movie. They know exactly what film they're in and they are having a ball in it. And I think Charles Gray similarly knows exactly what movie he's in, like you said, and is having a blast being in that movie. And I think a lot of the rest of the cast doesn't know what film they're in, or maybe they do, but they can't commit, right? Like Sean Connery, we talked about this a little bit the other day. Like, I think he's in sort of like an in between space. Like, I don't think he's playing it as serious as his earlier movies, but he's also not going full camp either. And so he's sort of like in between, trying to have like the best of both. And I think because of that, he sort of doesn't nail it either way. Like there are moments in this that I like of Connery, and then there are moments that I don't. And then we also get into the element of like how much did Connery, you know, actually give to this film versus the earlier ones. But I think unquestionably it is a movie hampered by the fact that it doesn't commit all the way across the board to go in full camp with all the actors and their performances. Like only some of them are kind of aware of what movie they're in. It feels like the movie itself only commits some of the time. Like some of the time it's like tries to be really serious and it sort of works occasionally. I think like in the fight, and then other times it goes serious and it doesn't really work. The movie is really strange because like it is just really until Blofeld gets introduced just about diamond smuggling. And it's not like the most like engaging plot point really until they finally reveal that like Blofeld has an army of body doubles. And so like I think there were a lot of really interesting decisions made across the board. Like it was crazy watching the making of and reading about this movie where like some of the original pitches were like it was basically going to be essentially a sequel to Goldfinger and have Goldfinger's twin brother, who was like a Swedish fishing magnate, be the villain in the movie instead of Blofeld, right? Like that was the original draft of the movie written. And they were like, well, we don't want to do that. And so like I think you see this is a very just disjointed movie at times and kind of helter skelter, but a movie that does move at a very brisk pace, and that is just you were rocking it along in a lot of ways. And so when you do compare it to something like Thunderball, which is in pretty much the exact opposite, right? Like it is slow and it is plodding at times, and basically every act, pacing wise, is a mess. Maybe with the exception of like the second act of the film, but certainly the last and the first act are just incredibly slow paced. Diamonds Are Forever is flying through everything. Like you are getting no time to linger, and it sort of works, right? Like I think the film is actually paced well. I think the film has a lot of fun moments to it. Like I think Vegas would be a completely ridiculous place to have a bomb movie be set in almost any other case, but for this kind of movie, it actually works really well. And like maybe that to me is like the biggest takeaway for Diamonds Are Forever, where like in almost any other Bond movie, this thing or this thing or this thing wouldn't work at all. And here they still don't work all the time, but like there's a element of like, oh yeah, like that works in what they're doing in this movie. Whether that's Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, whether that's Charles Gray's Blofeld, whether that's the Vegas setting, or whether that's the very campiness of the movie and the tongue-in-cheek nature of it. I think it's a movie that basically came after a very dour and somber, slow movie in On Her Majesty's Service, and they were like, we're going to make James Bond fun again. And they didn't necessarily nail the equations on that, but it's certainly a more fun experience a lot of times than that other movie or Thunderball, for example, were.
Yeah, it's like I imagine being like I think of it like being a Bond fan now. There's definitely a whiplash going between a lot of these movies early on, and
Yeah.
and I imagine like at the time there wasn't like this sense of like these weren't trying to be the most critically acclaimed films. These were just kind of like, I mean, they were the popcorn flicks of their day kind of thing. They were the the MCU of their day.
Yeah.
And so like people were going and I'm sure just having fun with them.
Yeah.
It's like we talked about this a little bit when you were still here. Like the idea that like the opening sequence is supposed to be like the payoff of the Tracy death from the last movie. It's like they don't actually bother setting that up properly at all. That's like
they don't say her name once in the movie.
Exactly. It's a cold open, and they just and it's like I made the point of like you could argue that On Her Majesty's Secret Service exists outside of the continuity of like the Never Say or You Only Live Twice into this, and it could just be like this Connery is picking up where he left off. Obviously,
Sure.
On Her Majesty's Secret Service goes out of its way to tie itself back to those other movies. But like, if you didn't watch that and you just watched these last two Connery movies, like it tracks just fine. Of Connery has been on the hunt for Blofeld, finally finds him and thinks he kills him. But yeah, there's also just this weird absurdity of Bond at like in his secret agent status being hired out to a diamond company to like investigate cartel stuff.
Yeah.
Has no bearing on the safety of Britain
Queen and country.
or anything like that. And like it stumbles into
Yeah.
the fact that like Blofeld is actually the mastermind behind that as well.
It has nuclear weapon destroying technology.
Yeah. And it blows up from there, quite literally. But like the whole setup of this mission is just like that's why is the British government sending off one of their top men for hire instead of like actually trying to do, the spy work that that he should be doing for Queen and country. And I felt it's weird that like this was, potentially almost a sequel to Goldfinger, because I kind of had the same argument with Goldfinger of like, sure, and you kind of pointed out like, yeah, that's going to have more impact on Britain's economy or whatever, but it's still like he gets hired out to a bank, not to like Britain to go and investigate like the gold stuff. So yeah, it's just a weird kind of another weird parallel between those two movies that I think they wanted to keep the character and they just couldn't figure out how to make these stories tie into like the character's actual occupation. So they just kind of were like, yeah, we'll just put him on loan.
We're gonna do something different.
And so yeah, that was I think a weak element of just writing and the basic like establishing the basic premise of this movie early on. And yeah, there is like, even from that scene, we talked about again, like there's this weird like passive aggressive hostility between the movie and Sean Connery as Bond. In that scene with M, like he's just kind of being like, we did fine without you. And then also just the idea like making Connery look ridiculously silly, driving a moon buggy across the desert, and then a motor trike across the desert in
that he's 3 times too big for, right?
Yeah,
6'3" Sean Connery looking ridiculous on this dune buggy thing.
Yeah, but like that, I mean, that whole sequence in general is just like like they go into this like moon set where people are filming a thing,
reenacting the moon landing,
whatever, like what, and it's never explained why that's a thing that's happening in this otherwise like chemical plant or whatever. It like just makes no sense, except that it serves as a way for Bond to get in this moon buggy thing and then break on out of there and lead to this chase. But I admired the commitment. Maybe the people who knew what movie they were in the most were the two like space actors who like stayed in like floating slow motion as like people are racing into the set and having a gunfight and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just like such weird absurdity to this movie.
Yeah.
And I loved that like when we got to the Bambi and Thumper scene, you kind of say like, oh, this is the most memorable moment in the movie for me. And I'm like, this is a movie where there was a moon buggy chase, and you're going to say this is going to top that?
Yeah.
It did not for me, but I can absolutely see like as soon as they just go over the top with their flips and acrobatics and their banter with Bond, I was like, okay, I get where Logan was coming from. Moon buggy still does it for me, but shout out to Bambi and Thumper just being full like whatever the hell, like they seemed like they were coked up on something while the movie was pitched to them, while they were brought in to do those scenes, and probably for years after the fact.
The Bambi and Thumper scenes are incredible because, I mean, they're just absolutely absurd. And like my all-time favorite scene from that sequence that I point out to you too is there's a moment where I think Thumper, like Bambi's got her legs around Bond's neck, and like Thumper like does some somersaults and like charges at Bond and like does a kick that misses him even though he's just trapped there, and then like does the splits and then like starts to get up in the slowest possible way like imaginable while like just glaring at Bond the entire time and like slowly rising like this, and then does like a weird fake kick before finally kicking him. Like it's just an incredible like people watched that on set and were like, that's the tape we want to use. That's what we want her to do, is like this weird, slow fake kick, miss, then fake kick again, then actually hit him, get up so slow. Like it is just like a surreal piece of like filmmaking, and it's just mind boggling, right? Like it is such a like absurdist comedy. And
the absurdity of those women who were up until that point, highly capable and kicking his ass, but then he just gets them. He basketball palms both of them and keeps them both underwater for long enough to really drown them, or until the CIA kind of comes in, and it's just like why have they suddenly become so ineffective?
It
Because
is.
the plot needs them to be.
It's such a weird movie, and I think the more I talk about it with you, and the more I think about it, like this is maybe peak camp James Bond. Because even the Roger Moore movies that I think of that are very camp, that we'll get to down the line, they're still grounded at, I feel like at times, maybe one exception, maybe there's one that might be just as campy as this, but like for the most part, still grounded in some sort of reality that makes sense. Whereas like this, almost from the opening seconds, is completely ridiculous and like grounded in another world. And it's sort of fascinating to watch in that way, right? Like it is a sort of a weird look at like what a almost like proto Austin Powers James Bond movie would be, right? Like this is almost like a parody of Bond while actually being an official Bond movie, and it's sort of remarkable to watch for that reason. And I think I don't know, like the movie shouldn't work, and it doesn't. I guess really, to be fair, it's not a good movie, but it is fascinating to watch, and it's so much fun um, because of it, and even like the ineptitude of like Felix and the CIA and like the circus, where there's like we have 38 agents on the floor and just one of her, and she like gets lost so easily from them, right? And like breaks out, and then like Tiffany Case's character in general is just another character who is just kind of ridiculous and absurd, and who is not the most deep Bond character by any means, but has some sort of motivations to her, right? And very much is like a wise ass and kind of a smart alecky character that sort of works the fact that this is like such an American focused movie.
I mean, I described
Yeah,
her as the Willie Scott of Temple of, like,
sure,
she's basically that role from Temple of Doom
sure.
in this, but maybe less just screams all the
Significantly less
time.
screaming. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Like she actually
Um,
like shows competence and a
mhm.
survivability, like the fact that, like, she endears herself to Blofeld enough to be like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. That's fine. I have no allegiance to Bond. I just want to
Yeah.
stay alive. I just want diamonds.
Yeah.
Like that's that like that is, puts her above and beyond Willie Scott for me. But like
Mhm.
for so much of the movie, she just kind of filled that, like, well, Bond needs a female sidekick in this
Mm.
to
Mhm.
be the Bond lady. Um and yeah, for like a lot of it, it's just like, okay, this is weird and doesn't quite work, and whatever, but she definitely has some fun with it, I'll say.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it is. It's a weird movie, and it is a trip. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, like this is one thing we've been talking about is that like Sean Connery is 41 years old in this movie. He's actually going to be the youngest any actor will ever be when they leave the role, for actors who did multiple movies. Um, and he's definitely older than he was when we last saw him in You Only Live Twice. Like he's definitely aged, but I was surprised at how largely well I think he looks for the most part. Like he looks older. He's aged, but I think he still pulls it off. Right? He still has like the Peter Franks fight scene that is all Connery. Like you can see his face like the entire time, basically. Like I still think he does a reasonably good job as Bond here. It's just he can't decide if he wants to go full camp or not. Um, yeah, it is a very strange, very bizarre movie that either inadvertently or on purpose, I can't really tell half the time, is also fun to watch with other people. Um, yeah, I don't know.
I was just reminded, as I'm looking through the credits here, that they go to the funeral home called Slumber Inc.,
Hmm.
and it's because the guy is actually named Slumber,
Mr.
like
Slumber,
Mr.
yeah.
Slumber. And it's just like, like how I thought like the on the nose names were going to be like reserved now for the female characters, Plenty O'Toole,
Oh no, oh
Tiffany
no.
Case, but no, apparently just anybody gets
Okay,
those
we're
those
we're
vibes.
if anything, we're entering the era where everyone is fair game for ridiculous names like this. These next 2 decades are prime real estate for pretty primo names. Trevor, what are the earmuff moments that have or haven't aged well for Diamonds Are Forever?
Probably most consistently the idea that Tiffany Case is just basically scantily clad through like most of the movie,
Almost the entire film.
like apart from I guess the circus sequence, but then that introduces the other the other like worst case
Weird,
worst offender that I that I highlighted, like when it was popping up, they go into like the little freak show kind of thing. And start talking about like the exotic woman from Africa. And I basically said, I was like, oh, we're about to get into something going to be really offensive, aren't we? And sure enough, it's like they have this, sideshow exhibit of an African woman turning into a gorilla. And it's like, nope, nope. Bad.
Very weird.
Yeah, like so those elements continue. And yeah, just kind of the underlying like misogyny of these films. Like obviously like Plenty O'Toole also doesn't get the good representation really or anything like that. So
in her name,
in her name,
named
or
after her father,
or
suppose, yeah.
just how blatantly of a gold digger she is.
Yep.
Like those elements did not hold up well. I will say, like, to its credit, like we talked about this a little bit. The relationship between Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, like, isn't nearly as offensive as I would expect something of that era to be. It's handled like pretty much just kind of like they're together.
Yeah.
They're like there's only like a couple really like overt confirmations that like they are a homosexual couple.
Yeah.
But like they're not, talking in stereotypical kind of like homosexual manners, especially for that time. They're
not
like
overly flamboyant.
Exactly. Like people aren't like, there isn't hatred and like anything thrown against them because of their sexuality or anything like that. So like that surprisingly is like maybe the most progressive thing like the Bond series has done so far. In those characters.
It's interesting. Me and you each, and we'll get to this in a little bit here, I think really loved Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd as characters. I think they're a ton of fun. And I think the depiction of them as a couple is just sort of a thing that just kind of happens, right? Like it's not a major plot point, like you said. It's just kind of there happening, and it is just like a single facet of who they are, and not like the totality of these characters, right? They don't go full flamboyant. They aren't like over the top, and for characters who are kind of larger than life and absurdist at times, their sexual orientation is not a part of it that is over the top or absurdist. It's just a thing about them. And I think, like it is weirdly one of the things that the Bond series maybe has most been progressive about at this point in time in the series, right? And that I think is totally to the credit of, Diamonds Are Forever. Like they did that, I think, really well. Tiffany Case and Plenty O'Toole, less so. Definitely so. Plenty O'Toole also just like basically being there to again being a Honey Rider character who basically is there to just like look attractive and then get thrown out a window, basically. Is not ideal, obviously, but yeah, it's a very weird movie in terms of like the things that haven't aged well. I should say that it is nice to, it is a Bond movie where no one is getting hit in the face who is a woman, which we can't say for On Her Majesty's Good Service, that I remember anyway.
I think, Bond chokes that first girl out in the hunt for Blofeld. Like he chokes her out with her own bikini top. Which is odd. And I think he does smack Tiffany Case at one point. I think I remember seeing that and being like, still doing this again.
But yeah, I mean, it is definitely not the worst in terms of what's aged poorly out of these movies. Trevor, let's go to Villain's Corner. Where are we ranking Blofeld 3.0 here among our various Bond baddies?
I mean, like, if you think about it, he's probably been the most successful one yet, setting off like a number of nukes,
Yeah.
and getting the upper hand on Bond a couple times.
Him
But
and
like,
Goldfinger, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Goldfinger succeeded at exactly what he wanted to do, if not for Pussy Galore just like turning at the last second, basically. But
Yeah.
like he had done his plan successfully.
yeah, or if not for that, the bomb tech showing up with 7 seconds left to go before.
Yeah,
before
exactly
it
right.
detonates.
Otherwise, he wins.
Yeah.
That's a thing. Yeah.
Like he definitely would have died in the blast, but he still would have gotten his victory. So yeah, I mean, like I at least put him above Blofeld 1.0. And
Oh, okay.
and it's a matter of like, at the end of the day, I don't know if I'll like remember this perform. Like, he's not doing anything like extremely extravagant or anything like that.
Mhm.
To where I would put him above Odd Job. But I do think like there's a more full performance there than with Odd Job, but that's just because Odd Job is designed to be a mute henchman.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say I'll put this above Blofeld 1.0, but below Odd Job.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually not unpersuaded by that. Like one of the things I'm the most surprised by watching the movie again is how much I liked Blofeld in this movie. Right, this has always been a Blofeld interpretation I never really liked or cared for, and it's ridiculous, but it's also one that is, I think, a lot of fun. I personally really like Blofeld 1.0. Obviously, this is, I think, and then between one of the things we most disagree on in the series, I would have Blofeld 1.0, as one of my favorite villains.
I mean, I think as we've kind of discussed, I think a lot of that is Blofeld 1.0 is so much the visual inspiration for Dr. Evil, and me having seen Dr. Evil many times, long before ever seeing that actual version of Blofeld.
Yeah.
The 1.0 version of Blofeld doesn't nearly live up to the reverence that like Dr. Evil would suggest.
Yeah. And that's totally fair. That's totally valid. Like for me, I would still Blofeld 1.0 ahead of it, just for I think the like pop culture lasting power, right? Where like that is like, I think a lot of people when they think of like Bond baddies and like Blofeld in particular, they think of that version of the character.
Sure.
Whereas 3.0, I think, is out of the three Blofeld characters we've gotten on screen, the one that is the least remembered, right? Like I think Telly Savalas is like the best character of the three Blofelds, I think. And then I think the first one is the most kind of visually striking, and I think this one is sort of the other Blofeld. So for me, I would have him ranked below 1, but I think he's in that neighborhood of Blofeld 1 and 3 kind of together.
That's fine.
In terms of QLab gadgets, I really only have 2 that Bond has. The first is the voice changing machine from Q that he gets, that really Blofeld had first, but then Q kind of makes it up. And the other is the slot rigging device that Q wears while talking to Tiffany Case.
Yeah, I appreciate that he's like fully ready to go into the nerd science behind it, and she's like, "I don't care. I just want your money.
Away,
I just want the money that you were getting."
Yeah, this is a great move for Q. I always enjoy getting Q out in the field because I think he gets to have really fun moments with some of the other characters. And I think him and Bond and him and Tiffany Case have some great scenes together.
He doesn't get it from, I mean, like, we don't see him get it from Q, but presumably he gets like the grapple hook thing from Q that he uses,
which is a
rad
thing that he is a fucking cool ass takedown of another fake Blofeld. When he like hits the cat to go to it, as well. That's a great shout out. Yeah, some solid gadgets, if not the most gadget heavy of the movies we've seen so far. In terms of those music moments, I'm going to be honest, Trevor. If you put a gun to my head, and I've seen this movie a dozen times, I could tell you very little about the Diamonds Are Forever theme.
I mean, yeah, I would.
I think it's totally standard. I think it's totally average. It's fine.
It I mean, I called out that it was another Shirley Bassey one after Goldfinger.
Yep.
So it has that, it has her great delivery and great performance, but the song itself, I
It's
think,
fine.
is whatever. It didn't
Yeah.
like it didn't break through into the zeitgeist where I was like, oh, I know this song. I've heard this song
Exactly.
before.
I think it's mid-tier out of the
Yeah.
Bond themes, right?
Yeah, I would. I mean, like there's an element of like, well, Tom Jones has more notoriety, so maybe Thunderball should be better than this one. But like, I would still put this above Thunderball because like
I would agree.
I just don't think the Thunderball theme was great. And then
I would
On Her
agree.
Majesty's Secret Service, like I I would consider putting it over that one as well, just because that one's not like the theme isn't really the theme so much as it's the Louis Armstrong that comes, midway through the movie.
I think it's totally valid.
So,
Yeah, I agree with that, Rankin. That's totally valid. I mean, I think it's sort of perfect that it is exactly the middle of the themes we've had so far. Seems totally fair because it's not bad. I mean, Shirley Bassey does a great job with it. It's just sort of kind of forgettable, the actual song itself. Trevor, that takes us to the final review and thoughts on Diamonds Are Forever. How'd you like the movie?
I mean, like,
it's a weird one to rank.
It's a weird one to rank. I mean, so we typically kind of do the A through F rankings, and I mean, this is going to be a weird one because I'm going to give it a bad grade, but I'm going to like rank it higher than some of the movies that I've given better grades. Like this is a D+ movie, if that. Like, and D+ is probably being generous to it. And more so, I'm just using that as a plug for That D+ Show. Go check that podcast out.
Every Friday,
where we basically do this whole thing, but for Disney+ movies. So yeah, D+ movie. It is not a good movie by any means, but it's a very fun D+ movie in the way that many of the the Disney Channel original movies from our youth have been, or something like that. So ranking wise, I put this, for me, probably above. I mean, it definitely goes above Thunderball, because Thunderball is just boring as shit, and I never want to watch that. I never want to see that again. I was like, anytime Bond does anything underwater, I'm still probably going to have PTSD for the rest of this series. And then I just think there was like so many problematic elements of You Only Live Twice that I put like this. While it has like a couple like very blatantly problematic things, is more just like campy stupidness than like, hey, we're just going to be completely racially insensitive to an entire country of people. So then it becomes like, I would probably be more inclined to watch this again over Dr. No, because Dr. No, I think, just is kind of a by the numbers thing, and this at least, like, Dr. No was before they kind of landed on like the key elements of a Bond movie formula. And this at least has a lot of those key elements to make it a little bit more fun and engaging, as stupid as it is. So I think I'd put it above Dr. No as well. I think I put this below Gold, like basically smack in the middle of my list so far. Goldfinger, From Russia with Love, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and then Diamonds Are Forever.
Wow, love it. Okay, there we go.
I'm really hoping that like there are a lot of good Bond movies ahead, so that this one does not end up in my top 10. But
I can't imagine.
But if it does, it'll be like, it was like,
it was fun.
Maybe it'll just be like, hey, there are only 5 good Bond movies, so my top 5 is all that matters.
Yeah, no, there definitely aren't. Like this definitely won't end up in your top 10. I find it more interesting that just the movies below it won't be. No, you'll definitely have 10 movies above this. It's interesting. Like, I came into Diamonds Are Forever ready for it to be my least favorite Bond movie that we've done so far, ready for it to be last place and not even like worry about it. And it's tricky because I, at the moment, have Dr. No at my bottom of my list. I think about that every day. Honestly, somebody ranked it. Because like Dr. No is not the worst movie that we've seen so far. I think Thunderball is probably a worse movie than Dr. No. I just would maybe rather watch Thunderball again. Again, even that I go back and forth on.
You like number 2 way better than I did.
Yeah, like Diamonds Are Forever is so weird. I mean, like you gave it a D+. I think that's totally fair. I think it's totally valid. It is a D plus movie. It is not good. And it just becomes a question of like, like I always say, is it fun or not? And yeah, like it's certainly like I think for both with like the top two movies are the top two by quite a bit. There's sort of a jump from Rush with Love and Goldfinger compared to everything else. And so for me, I could see an argument that it is below On Her Majesty's Secret Service and above Thunderball and Dr. No. I can see an argument that it is below Dr. No just because it is a worse movie. God, yeah, like, and then it's complicated by the fact that, right, like I had a ton of fun watching it because I was watching it with you and getting to riff on it with you. So for me, I'm gonna put Diamonds Are Forever. I just think it's the worst movie. Like that's the thing. Like I'm gonna put it at the bottom of my list. Like
perfectly fair.
I think
it can be both the worst movie and a fun time.
Yeah, like I think that is sort of where it's at for me, right? And especially because like I think all of these movies up until Diamonds Are Forever, for me, at least for me on my ranking, I don't think any of them are bad, right? Like I don't think we've had a bad movie really up until this point. Like Thunderball has its issues that have been well documented. Go watch that episode. But like I still don't think it's a bad movie. I think it's very flawed, but there are elements of it that I think lift it to at least being like okay to good, right? And Dr. No, despite it being next to last on my list for how long, who knows, maybe I'll flip it above Thunderball eventually. I think Dr. No is a good movie. I just think it's, like you said, it has not figured out the Bond formula yet, and so it is kind of by the books and kind of plain in some ways. This is not a good movie, and it fails that first question I always ask of a Bond movie, like, is it a good movie? No. And I think everything else is at least a good movie, so that to me makes them better. It is still fun. We have not had a completely unenjoyable Bond movie experience yet, I think. And so that's kind of fun. And so for me, Diamonds Are Forever will come in last out of the first 7. For Bond on Bond, last week we talked about Lazenby. This week we get to finally officially wrap up the Connery era. Did Diamonds Are Forever change your perception as we officially wrap up the Sean Connery run of Bond movies?
I mean, and not in a broad sense. If we were to do kind of what we've done with like Blofeld, of like if we kind of called this Connery 2.0, I'd put Connery 2.0 below Connery 1.0 and above Lazenby.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Because I think what he has and what he brings back to the role is the swagger of Bond that Lazenby just didn't really capture in his one go.
It's his physical presence too, right? Like Sean Connery is just a big guy, right? Like I think he carries himself, especially by this point, maybe not in like Dr. No, but by the end of his first 5 films, and especially by here, like Sean Connery is a huge deal, and I think he's a big man and he carries himself like that. And that sense of, I think, swagger and sort of authority, but mixed with like an easy going nature to him, I think just speaks to be so James Bond. And I would agree that this, Connery 2.0 is below Connery 1.0, but still probably above Lazenby, because Lazenby, I think, just never got that sort of easygoing charm and like power, and that kind of ease of character that Connery has so well, and that Moore and Brosnan, I think, all kind of do as well. It's a weird Connery film. If anything, I'm sort of happy that like I don't dislike this Connery performance as much as I used to, right? Like I used to like really not like his performance in Diamonds Are Forever. And while it is certainly not his best and possibly his worst Bond performance, it is still more enjoyable and more fun than I thought it would be. And like I think there's definitely an argument to be made, which would stun me from like 10 years ago, that Connery is given more of a shit here in this role than he was in You Only Live Twice, for example. Right? Like I think here the 4-year break had allowed him to kind of care again, right? And I think he kind of found that passion for the character, whereas I think by the time of You Only Live Twice, he was so burnt out and frustrated and annoyed and angry at everything trying to be in James Bond. And I think here that's not the case. In some ways, it's interesting watching the movies again, and you might agree with this. where I see even more similarities between Connery and Daniel Craig's Bonds, in terms of the sense of frustration that they feel at times about being James Bond, and that being conveyed in bad performances. I think Spectre, for example, and Diamonds Are Forever is sort of Sean Connery's equivalent to No Time to Die, where I think Daniel Craig came back for that last movie as Bond and like really cared again about the character and really cared about the role and kind of wanted to give it a good send off. And I think Connery, while having to deal with a far worse movie than No Time to Die, is still caring, and I think still giving it a go here. And if he's not as, good or passionate as he was in his first 3 movies, where I think he's at his best, I think he's still better than he probably was in You Only Live Twice.
Yeah.
So there you go. Connery is Connery. Otherwise, that's the show. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, you can go over to youtube.com/thatnerdy site, where you would already have to be watching this YouTube exclusive series. While you're here, give us a thumbs up. Leave a little comment telling us what you thought of Diamonds Are Forever, how wrong or right we are about the movie and its various characters. And go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Hit the bell notification so you can be sure to get notified whenever the newest That Nerdy Site video goes live. You can also go over to thatnerdysite.com and check out all the latest written reviews, features, and everything going live there, including all the podcasts. And go check out the companion piece to Diamonds Are Forever that I will write in the future, from when we record this, but in the past from when you listen to it. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to plug or shout out?
Sure. So we're recording this the Monday after we all went and had a fun couple days at Disneyland. So by the time this episode goes live, there should be a That Nerdy Site show in the past where we sat down and kind of talked about our fun times there. So go back and check that episode out, because we all had a blast hanging out at Disneyland and California Adventure together. It was great kind of getting to see everybody in person for the first time since PAX East 2020. And yeah, it was just a great kind of little fun experience to celebrate. Like, wasn't even designed as like a That Nerdy Site thing necessarily, but it was like Logan was out in Arizona for his birthday. We kind of hijacked that into a Disney trip. Frank also was coming out to Arizona for his birthday, and Cameron has been wanting to go and build a lightsaber for a couple years now. So we all went. We all had great Star Wars adventures in Galaxy's Edge, made our lightsabers, and then had a great time over it in California Adventure too. So great time hanging out with the boys.
I will absolutely echo that shout out. You can find me at LeftyLogie, at LeftyLoggy, LOGGY on the internet. I will echo that shout out. It's a great one. It was a blast coming out to Phoenix, hanging out with Trevor, Cam, and Frank there, celebrating my and Frank's birthdays. It's a ton of fun.
At 3 of the 4 Portillos in the Phoenix area.
3 of the 4 Portillos in Phoenix. I like Phoenix a lot. I know Phoenix gets a lot of shit, including from some members of That Nerdy Site. Shout out to Jazz. But I like Phoenix. I've never had a bad time there. It's a ton of fun. And Disneyland and California Adventures was as well. It was a great time all around. Plus, we got to do some road trips, obviously, from Phoenix to Anaheim, and I love a good road trip. So yeah, go check out That Nerdy Site podcast that we haven't recorded yet, but that is going to be fantastic when we do here in the next week. And then I will also give a shout out to the That Nerdy Site show / News You Care About kind of crossover that we did for Game of the Year. That is a 4.5 hour long podcast that I thought was a really great conversation. As myself, Frank, Trevor, and Cameron all went through our top 10 games and honorable mentions, and then kind of ranked what the 10 best games for That Nerdy Site would be. I thought it was a really fun conversation. That basically was just what we did for the 6-hour car ride to and from Phoenix to Anaheim. So yeah, go check that out. It was a blast. And finally, you can go check out That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. Otherwise, we're done with Sean Connery. We're done with the Spectre storyline. We're done with Blofeld here on that Bond show. And we're done with a kind of continuous storyline for James Bond for the next few decades. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Bond Show, be good to each other, and we will return with Live and Let Die.